And welcome to the SpartanMag.com VCast. Jim Comparoni, Paul Konyndyk, press box. Spartan Stadium, Michigan State loses 38-13. UCLA blown out. Could have been a lot worse. UCLA could have scored 50 if they wanted to. And after a game like this, a lot of times we'll talk about a Michigan State loss, and we talk about things that went wrong with the team and this and that. But that seems like it's almost beside the point. Now it's more about the program. What's wrong with the program? What do people think about the program? Because they took a big step back in this game. And a lot of people thought coming into it that Michigan State could not afford to lose this game to UCLA. I was among them. I mean, you got to beat UCLA. They were 0-4 a couple of weeks ago. They beat Penn State. Interim coaching staff for UCLA. That should be low-hanging fruit for a Michigan State team that's desperate for wins. Did not happen. We're not competitive. Couldn't stop the run. Couldn't establish the run. They were outgained 238-87 on the ground. Miscommunications and coverage busts. Almost had a punt blocked. Which, I mean, there's a long list of things that went wrong. A step back, regressing. Michigan State is just not as good as they were last year, Paul.
As good as they were 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
I mean, they're not as good as they were last week. This was a step back in a lot of ways. And, I know Joe Rossi said earlier this week, defensive coordinator Joe Rossi talked about how well they practiced. They didn't show up on the film today. What I didn't like is the lack of resilience. From these guys, and we've seen like the last 2 weeks against Nebraska and USC before that when things went bad and when it turned into one of those Category 5 crap storms. Michigan State bowed up and they did some good things. In this one, I think one of the things that Jonathan Smith said in his post-game press conference that was pretty accurate was a lot of those 3rd and 3, 3rd and 4, whatever. 4th and 3, 4th and 2, whatever, where you have to bow up. UCLA got just enough, and Michigan State didn't get those. And then there's a lot of like routine plays that you expect guys to make. Like Jalen Berger looked like a Heisman Trophy winner today, and that's a guy that nobody gave a second thought of when he left the program as a transfer. That doesn't jive. He had more carries today than I think he's had all season. He had more productive plays than he's had all season. In Michigan State, seemingly
they were riding him for a reason.
Yeah, and there's so this was, I think, the worst performance of the year, without a question in my mind. But it's also the low point of the Jonathan Smith era, and it's to this point in 2 years. But this is one of those disappointing things because you don't expect to get slammed this much by a Penn State team that did, or not a UCLA team that wasn't coming out of nowhere. Michigan State was on alert for this. UCLA didn't have the advantage of playing on the West Coast. They had to come out here and play a game which was essentially 9 o'clock in the morning for them. And aside from the first defensive possession, the first offensive possession, this game was dominated by UCLA, and that's unacceptable because UCLA has some good players and they have some they have some belief right now, but this is one of those peer group games, and you can't perform like this in a peer group game. And when I say that's how I judge Michigan State, how you perform against your peer group. And if you lay an egg like this in a game like this with as much on the line, to me that's a bad indicator of where your program's at. That's a bad mile marker for Michigan State. And the fans that booed today, and there were quite a few of them, they left Spartan Stadium without any kind of iota of a belief that this program is headed in the right direction or is in good hands, and that's disappointing.
There's no signs that it is right now. I mean, there were some signs against Nebraska and USC. And the strange thing about those games with USC and Nebraska, as they were unfolding, my thought was, wow, Michigan State, they're in danger of getting blown out at USC. And then they came back. Against Nebraska, 14-0. They're in danger of getting blown out. And they managed to not get blown out. To their credit, they came back and made those things happen. But realistically, they could be looking at 3 straight blowouts right now. And they did well to avoid. When you're doing well to avoid blowouts, you got a problem. And as well as they performed and came back in those games, today they were equally ineffective. And, another bad thing about today, I mean, Nico Amayaleva, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. UCLA did this and destroyed Michigan State, and he didn't even have that great of a game. Like, he's capable of hitting. He was missing some targets, and they didn't even have to utilize him as a runner. That's another component. I mean, they could have scored 50. Michigan State, shockingly uncompetitive in this game, shockingly unorganized on defense. last week I thought there was something to build on with Michigan State's defensive performance against Nebraska, which Nebraska had been a highly productive offense, and Michigan State kept them to 280 yards or whatever it was, and showed some things that I thought they were going to build on. Then to come out and just from the beginning, I think Jordan Hall missed a communication on one. There was that pass touchdown out on the flat to Berger for the third touchdown where Wayne Matthews didn't cover him. But even before that, there were the tight end, on that crossing route. I think that Hall was in the neighborhood on that, and some others. And 4th and 1, giving up, some movement there. The punt fake, it looked to me like I thought Michigan State was. It didn't perform like they were in punt safe, but when I looked at it again, it looked like they were in some version of punt safe. But one or two players were calling out an alert, and as it turned out, Amarian Smith was in position to maybe make a tackle there, but Michigan State, I don't think, was really rallying back for a return and to allow a fake punt to go through that easily, and then they go down and score. Just one thing after another. In all phases, Michigan State, they looked like the team that was playing with an interim coach with nothing to play for. UCLA's got the interim coach, and they've got all this pizzazz right now.
Yeah, and it's disappointing. The thing that's disappointing, like a lot of people are going to talk about, and I wrote about this a minute ago, about the quarterback situation. Does Michigan State need to make do they need to mix up that quarterback thing? To me, the real story of the season is, we talked about all indications were, and these defensive coaches don't typically blow smoke. I think they really went into the season believing that they could stop the run.
Yeah.
Right. So and that was pretty. They've got if it looks like they have the personnel to be able to stop the run, or they did going into the season. That you have the big body defensive linemen, the tackles. You got linebacker experience, safety experience, and for whatever reason, that hasn't happened. And to me, that's one of the biggest failings of this team is that. If you're not stopping the run, you really can't be competitive in a lot of these games. And you really, UCLA, one of the reasons they beat Penn State last week is they rushed for 270. In these games where they lost, they barely did anything on the ground. One of the reasons that Michigan State was successful earlier in the season is they were able to run the football a little bit. And they stopped the run. But in Big Ten play, Michigan State has not been able to stop the run. Nebraska doesn't run the football, so I think that's an outlier. Nebraska doesn't really care if they run the football because a lot of their short passes are essentially the equivalent of running plays because they have an offense built on check down passes essentially. But not able to stop the run. That's kind of me the biggest glaring deficiency of this year, and that one really caught me off guard. I knew that they weren't going to have a great pass rush. I think that's been obvious. But when you've got experience returning in your front seven, and and a belief that you're going to stop the run, and you have coaches on defense that have stopped the run in the past, that's a shock to me. And that's why I don't have faith. There's offensive stuff as well, and I think body language and all those things we just talked about. But if you can't stop the run, you can't win football games in conference football in a power conference. And I thought that's the one thing that Michigan State, as a defense, had to hang their hat on.
And I thought they'd be pretty good at that this year too. And today they were terrible with it. Smith talked about it at halftime in his radio interview. Gap, not fitting gaps and so forth. Go back, I'm sure that'll be part of it. I don't know if there were a lot of missed tackles, but there was on the 4th down play and a few others here and there. But just, people had running to daylight alarmingly. And, in addition to that, their second or third touchdown for UCLA. UCLA did a good job with one of their inside receivers, slot receiver. It was a blitz, 0 safeties, Michigan State getting aggressive. And they wisely found the matchup. They found a slot receiver against Amarian Smith. And Smith has had a good, has made contributions as a safety this year, stepping in for Nikai Martinez when he's been out. It's been a good story and so forth. But in man-to-man, he can't win a drag race with the slot receiver from UCLA. And it's a blitz. The quarterback has time to let that drag race develop, finds it, and he beats it by a step and a half. When Jonathan Smith's talking about we're losing one-on-ones, that's one of them that they're losing right there, and that's a safety Michigan State inherited. Michigan State went into the portal and got 2 or 3 safeties during the offseason. Some are developmental guys. Some, have been injured, like Dontavius Nash coming back today. Revels, the kid from Bowling Green's more of a developmental guy for later. But Ade Willie is their nickel back. he normally would be covering that guy. And Ade Willie had struggles last year as a corner, but he would have a better chance covering that guy than Amarian Smith. So that was specifically, Amarian Smith has started at safety as a second stringer, but he's a second string safety posing as a second string nickel. And that's the wrong sports car for that track. Jalen Thompson had a pretty good game last week, unavailable today. So Michigan State starts Quindarius Dunnigan. He's capable. But then when you go to a second string, a lot of times they were moving Santiago over there, kind of mixing and matching. Santiago is more of an edge, stand-up edge defensive end. Moved him to down defensive end. Not really his track either. I wonder how many running plays were in areas where Jalen Thompson might have been able to help here and there. Among other things, Michigan State is down some personnel too. So when they're losing one-on-one matchups, sometimes they're losing with second stringers. And the way Smith talked about it, we're losing one-on-ones, and he said that 2 or 3 times. When it's year 2, year 3 they're your players. Year 2 they are almost all your players. So it's on you to put your roster together. Is it more difficult than he anticipated? Is the schedule more difficult and the Big Ten more difficult than he anticipated? Well, this is one of his old Pac-12 foes that he beat twice when he was at Oregon State, when they had Chip Kelly as head coach. So I wonder about Smith and what's going on in his head about the whole construct. Is this harder than I thought it'd be? Did they have the support last year that they thought they would have NIL-wise? That's still, shaking out and so forth. But that has nothing to do with miscommunications on defense and continued failure to get a run game established, which was their calling card at Oregon State, and they cannot get it established here. They're without 2 starters on that offensive line. But still, we saw some under, so you compare it to what you know. And we knew D'Antonio and John L. Smith and some of those teams. And when D'Antonio had some teams that were shorthanded, they still had a buttoned-up operation. They were still correct. They might lose some drag races here and there. But these guys are losing drag races, and they're incorrect all over the place. And that's what's hard for fans to swallow right now.
Yeah, they did not lose. If they lost games against teams in their peer group, it was by a touchdown or less. I think of some of the Iowas or even some of the, and I understand D'Antonio's team lost to Central Michigan. That was a tough loss and stuff like that. But they did like one of the things I wrote about in my 3-0 is like, I know Michigan State's not a great team, but are they getting better? Are they as good a version of themselves as they can be under the circumstances? And the answer to that is absolutely not. And you look at guys like I'll mention, the Jalen Berger is an example I just mentioned a bit ago, but also Anthony Thompson, the guy that they didn't try, that left in the portal. Last year, Anthony Jones. I'm sorry, he left in the portal, but he was effective in this game. So it's not like that UCLA is blowing them away with. The quarterback is good. The quarterback, and he creates some stuff with his ability to scramble. I will say
their roster is loaded with 4 stars.
Right, and they've got some talent, but there's not like it's not like they're playing Ohio State.
No,
and. In the D'Antonio era, there was a handful of these type of games with this kind of outcome. When you played a team like a Penn State that had, like when Joe Pa had it really rolling, or an Ohio State, or other team that was really, really good. Or you might go out and you might play Nebraska or an Iowa team and have a bad day. There's a couple times where they had games like that. But you didn't lose a game like this in your peer group at home under these circumstances. You might lose a game, but you're not getting blown out, and that's a disappointment. Especially they keep on talking about how they want to be playing their best football at the end of the season. I know it's cliche, but you want to see those kind of mistakes going away.
And
when you see those mistakes continuing or getting worse or springing up in another area, that gives you pause about the direction of the program. And I think those are fair criticisms, and it's fair to wonder about the direction of the program based on the product on the field, because it's not good right now.
All right, for those of you interested in gaming, it's not for everybody. And if you've got a gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER. But if you are interested in gaming, got a sponsorship with On3 with BetMGM.com. And if you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code ON3, and you will get up to $1,500 and a first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's how it works. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using bonus code ON3. And deposit at least $10 and place your first wager on any game. You will receive up to $1,500 in bonus bets, if your bet loses, just make sure you use bonus code ON3 when you sign up. Make this college football season fun for you if you can handle it. If you're interested in gaming, BetMGM is where to go. Disclaimer, see BetMGM.com for terms. 21 and over only. U.S. promotional offers not available in New York, Nevada, Ontario, or Puerto Rico. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Also in New York, call 1-877-8-HOPE-NY. In Arizona, call 1-800-NEXT-STEP. In Massachusetts, 1-800-327-5050. In Iowa, 1-800-BETS-OFF. In Puerto Rico, 1-800-981-0023. First bet offer for new customers only. Subject to eligibility requirements. Rewards are non-withdrawable bonus bets that expire in 7 days. This is in partnership with Kansas Crossing Casino and Hotel. Don't forget, if you have not signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code ON3 and get your $1,500 first bet offer today. Now, Smith today was, I want to ask you a little bit about his reaction to the post-game press conference. And you can check it out here on this channel. And also give us a like. Subscribe to this channel. Go to SpartanMag.com. $1 for a week as we get into covering what's going on with Michigan State football and what's next. And also Michigan State Basketball Media Day coming up probably on Thursday in the next few days. But Smith, his press conference, you can check it out here on this channel. And his reaction, among other things I thought was interesting, he was asked about the reaction of the crowd and the boos, and he had a pretty good answer. I mean, he said, hey, we know there's a lot of, he basically, I'm paraphrasing here, but he said, we know that there's a lot of interest here at a stadium. A lot of people are into it, and that's a two-way street. And I understand that. In other words, he says he understands that you want to coach at a place where it's important and fans come out, and if you don't play well, he understands the negative reaction. And I would say I hope that the players know that I don't think they're booing the players. Sometimes players think that they're getting booed. Now, these days, players are professionals, so it's a little bit different than it was in the old days.
Why does that even matter? I hear people say it's okay to boo professionals, it's okay, but don't boo college athletes. I don't make a distinction between those. I don't like it either way. I'm not saying that the fans weren't justified in doing that. Obviously, they're expressing their displeasure at the product on the field.
Yeah.
The difference between this one and what we see sometimes is situational booing, where a team decides not to go for it going into halftime or like that type of thing. This was continuous boos throughout the game, even before, right down towards halftime. It was constant. So these fans here weren't happy, and it was a good homecoming crowd on a cold fall afternoon. This team was coming home. Smith said that, hey, we're looking forward to playing in front of our home fans. We're looking forward to getting a bounce from our crowd, and they didn't do it. They didn't hold up their end of the bargain. Coaches, players, what have you. And I don't blame the fans for booing. Personally, I don't like it. But I think it's justifiable based on the product on the field. Michigan State fans deserve better, and I really don't care if players are, pros or college kids. It's part of athletics. They deal with a whole lot worse on social media. So I don't think this is nothing that's going to damage their confidence compared to what they have to go through when they see their Instagram feeds or what's going on X. And
what did you think about the rest of Smith's press conference and the way he handled it today?
I think he's asked a lot of tough questions for which there's not really answers for, and he's not going to, someone else asked me that on the elevator ride back up to the press box. Jonathan Smith's not going to win a press conference. He's not that kind of guy. He didn't break anything. He didn't go into histrionics. Maybe fans would have wanted to see that. I don't know if there are a whole lot of answers. Obviously he's upset, but anybody that doesn't like the direction of their program isn't going to be won over by Jonathan Smith's press conference, because to me, he's not a guy. He's not a fire and brimstone type of guy, and it's like he's not like a Pat Narduzzi over at Pitt, who's the fans are going to demand him to be fired for 2 straight games, and then he'll come out and beat a Clemson. To me, like Jonathan Smith's more like an analytical guy, and a lot of this stuff I think has to get fixed in the off season, and it's like chip away at the rock face stuff. I don't think he's a fire breather, and so I really don't know what the answers are. Like, what do you do at quarterback? Does it matter if you can't run the football? So a lot of these questions people are asking about is, should you make a change at quarterback? Is that really an effective solution? I don't know if much of what he was asked today has an answer to it.
Yeah, changing quarterbacks is not going to help a whole lot if you can't run the ball and you have no pass protection. Pass protection is going to be worse the next 2 weeks against Indiana and Michigan, I think. I thought Alessio Milivojevic looked good. in a lot of ways. In a couple of passes, he looked inexperienced, which is understandable. But when I think he processes things quickly, and when he makes a decision, he throws it with authority. There's some zip. Last week when he had some success against Nebraska, that last drive that he had against Nebraska was into the wind, and he was the only one of the 3 quarterbacks all day that had success thrown into the wind. I think Milivojevic looks like he's going to be a reputable college football quarterback in the future. And with Childs, the inaccuracy today came back like it was last year. There were some times when Michigan State might have been able to match UCLA for a while, and he missed Omari Kelly open deep once, and he was forcing some of his teammates to make difficult one-handed catches. The play that set up the 4th and 1 stoppage was a one-handed catch by Tao Tolliver. We finally saw Elijah Tao Tolliver's hands being a plus on that play. He had 35 catches last year at Sacramento State. Haven't seen it this year. He dropped one early against Nebraska. One-handed catch sets up 4th and 1. They go for it. And that, among a long list of things today, was a failure. But even some of Childs' completions were not accurate. So the accuracy, I thought, for Childs had improved earlier this season. Last week it took a step backward, I think understandably. He's going against the best pass defense in the Big Ten last week. Didn't have time to throw, didn't have a running game, and it was windy, so I kind of understood last week. But this week, at home in perfect conditions, looked more like the inaccurate passing we saw 13 months ago. And so Childs, still, he's got a lot of heart, got knocked out of the game making a heart play. His zone read, keeps it, gains a 4, spins to try to get extra yardage back toward the traffic, takes a shot to the head. Should have been targeting, gets knocked out of the game. To his credit, showing a lot of heart, will, trying to help the team, gets knocked out on a play trying to help the team.
I thought there's red flags last week with his accuracy, like in terms of one of the things I wrote last week is there's times where he looked like the sophomore version of Aiden Childs we saw last year. Like the one interception I think where he overthrew is a running back on an underneath
last week.
Yeah, on an underneath pass, and that was like it was uncalled for. I mean, it was an easy pass. The one that Omari Kelly, it was a deep ball, but it wasn't really that deep. It was like Omari Kelly's out there today, maybe 20 yards deep, and it's like an easy pass. And
is that a touchdown? I can't remember.
Yeah, it would
have been a touchdown.
It would have been. It was a busted coverage because they both followed Nick Marsh. One of the things that UCLA did effectively was double cover Nick Marsh, and we can talk about that a little bit later. But I think Nick Marsh's motion on that play, it created some coverage issues, and Omar Kelly was wide open on the other side of the formation, and Childs just
good play design. Give coaches credit on that one, right?
You would have had to be on an extension ladder to catch that, and that's the type of thing
he did last year.
And that's the type of thing that is especially problematic when you're having an offense that is hard to stay on schedule. You know what I'm saying? Like, you got to be able to throw this. You got to be able to do like Childs does some high end stuff, and occasionally he throws really really nice deep balls.
Yes.
I don't think Alessio throws poor deep balls. I think he there's some balls today that were thrown really deep and they're really well covered, but they had some zip on them and they're really accurate. But the problem with Childs is that he doesn't do simple well enough. For that high end talent that he brings to really bring himself to bear on the game. And I don't think Michigan State can afford that right now. If they need 4 yards, they need to be able to hit a tight end on a slant pass or somewhat, or they need to be able to go in between like 2 defenders on something underneath. And that accuracy piece, it wouldn't be as big a deal if Michigan State could run the football, for 250 yards a game against any opponent. But like right now, I think Childs has been hit a lot too, and I just feel like I don't want to give up on him, but we've seen this in the past over the years. And I was telling you off camera, like I was thinking of some of the Bill O'Brien Penn State teams and some of their quarterbacks that have had really good early careers, and they didn't have, they weren't getting good pass protection, and they got hit so many times that it just affected them, and their accuracy was off because of it, their decision making. I just feel like with Alessio, he hasn't been hit a lot, and I hate to say it, but it's a reality type thing, and I feel like he throws more accurately, even though the percentages wouldn't necessarily bear that out. He's 3 percentage points better than Childs today. They both threw under 50%. But in general, I think he throws, for as hard as he throws those short passes, they're right on the money and they're right where they need to be. And, so I think that's one of the reasons I might consider looking at him. as an option. Plus, I'd kind of a little bit worried about Childs' health. You know, he had the ankle last week, and today he took a shot in the head. I felt like when he got, tackled, when he got sacked early in that Nebraska game, I was worried about concussion with the way he went down and the way his head, came in contact with the ground. But I would really look at Alessio. I think for Childs, he's got so much ability, physical ability, but he's constantly has to fight with mechanics, and some guys are like that. But I mean, he's got to continue to work on that, because those passes that are easy for a lot of quarterbacks, like some of the underneath stuff, it's just like, just kind of without thinking, a lot of guys do it. He seems to have to fight that. One thing I would say about Alessio too is when he commits to one of those short passes, whether there's some coverage in the territory, he goes all in. It's like when his brain hits that switch, it's like, I'm committed to it and I make it happen. And maybe he'll have some of the same issues as Childs, but I think he does some things that can help this team. I think at the very minimum they should look at it. I think one area where he is better than Childs is he has a better rapport with Nick Marsh. There's no doubt about that. And I'm not saying that's good or bad necessarily. I felt like Childs, ironically, looked to target Nick Marsh way too much in this game. Smith said as much afterwards, talking about when guys are double covered, you need to go to a different option. Childs, I think for 3 straight plays were incompletions where he went at Nick Marsh when he was double covered. That can't happen. But
one was a throwaway. I think he's just throwing it out of bounds.
It was, but he wanted to go there.
Well, it was in that direction, but he'd given up. It was covered, and he didn't really try to get it to him.
Yeah, but I mean, he was looking at Nick Marsh's double coverage, and that shouldn't even be you should be going with the guys that are open. Mm-hmm. And when Alessio was in there, I don't feel like Nick Marsh was double covered as much. And by the way, the game was already kind of out of reach. But Alessio did a nice job with Nick Marsh, and I think the rapport that they have is undeniable.
Marsh was targeted 15 times today, so he wanted the ball more targets. He got them, and made some good plays, some yards after the catch, broke some tackles, did some good things. Might have dropped one. I think the first one in his first opportunity of the game, he dropped.
And then Childs went right back to him with one of his best passes. Childs' best passes of the day, where it was a bullet to that sideline, and Nick Marsh turned upfield.
Alessio showed some things, and Childs in the Boston College game, I thought was taking it up a notch and raising his ceiling and making progress. And now it seems to have leveled off. Players around him are not playing well. That has something to do with it, of course. Taking a beating has something to do with it. But if I'm grading Childs' stock, I'm a little concerned. Is he leveling off? Alessio, I think, has a pretty good future, and I'm curious what his ceiling is going to be. As it pertains to this team, question as to whether to hand things over to Alessio, it's enough of a question that it's. There's a lot of questions about this team, and that's one of them. I wouldn't have thought that would be the case 9 days ago, but here we are. And I'll get to a little bit more here in a second. But as you know, Michigan's recycling rate has fallen from 90% to 73% in recent years. Michiganders are squandering $105 million per year by not taking back their bottles and cans. That's hurting our environment. So help the environment, help yourself, help your beaches, your roads, and your environment in general. Take back those bottles and cans. Take them back. A message from Schupan, a great Michigan company dedicated to recycling and dedicated to the Michigan State Spartans. All right, Paul, I know your phone's probably been blowing up. The message board at SpartanMag.com blowing up. There's a lot of Michigan State fans out there you've all gotten it from your friends. You've heard it. I'm hearing it from all my Michigan State fans and friends, not my fans, but my friends who are Michigan State fans. They've seen enough. They want to move on. They don't think Smith's going to get it done. Now, in today's world of college football, I mean, I grew up in the era where you got 4 years or a 5-year plan. In this day and age, when Deshaun Foster gets fired after 1 year and 1 month, so fans in general are more. They've always been fanatical and very demanding, but the patience is way less than it used to be because they see other programs doing it. Now, we should do the same thing. For whatever reason, there were a lot of fans that just weren't sure about last year in particular, and I don't want to get into all of that. But now that this season has taken a dive like this, people are ready to change horses. Now, that'd be a very expensive proposition for Michigan State to seriously look at that. But then you run into a situation where if it gets worse than this, how much does it cost you to go into a third year when everybody knows that it's just not going to work out, like it did maybe John Elsmith's last year? Although John Elsmith went to a bowl game in his first year and had some ups and downs, right now there's not many ups. Now it's only 6 games into his second year, so I feel a little bit soily even bringing it up, but that is the nature of college football. That's what people are talking about. That's what's going on. How do you feel about that? I mean, I'm sure you heard from a lot of fans that are like, it's not going to happen, I'm done with them. But they said that about, I mentioned this in the SpartanMag VCast earlier this week, and I had the same conversation about Tom Izzo in December of 1997 when he was done, had no chance, year 3, not going to work.
The difference with him and Tom Izzo is Tom Izzo's a Michigan State guy. You know, like there's enough loyalty within, like, you know, the fan base. He was a guy that Judd Heathcote wanted.
But that worked against him back then, because back then all the fans thought the only reason he had the job is because he was a Heathcote guy.
I get that. But Tom Izzo, like, I mean, even if, like, I remember watching those games back then in his first couple of years, and yeah, you know, like, it wasn't what Michigan State wanted, and obviously the NCAA tournament is the bar, but it wasn't like they were finishing below 500. You know, my recollection of those teams, and I remember back then when I was like just a fan in college, or, you know, yeah, that was right when I was in college, and I remember thinking, you know, are they competitive, and do they have the pieces? I was dumb back then, but I'm still smart enough to know that
I'm still dumb.
Well, I'm dumb as well in a lot of areas, but in terms of like being able to recognize, I was able to recognize then that Tom Izzo's team, his first couple of teams were like the island of misfit toys. You know, those guys didn't quite fit together, and he was making you know, chicken salad out of other stuff, and it wasn't best for him, and that was like a disservice to him. Like, Judd didn't, you know, intentionally give him a bare cupboard, but, you know, like, you know all the background.
Interestingly,
with that.
Izzo was his first year was supposed to be Respert's senior year. Heathcote was going to retire that year, but then the Clarence Underwood attempting to fire Judd Heathcote thing happened, so Judd stayed on another year.
Human nature being what it is, and then so Tom Izzo inherited a really difficult situation, but then, like, in year 3 he turned it around. I don't think in today's climate, and Tom Izzo didn't have to fight social media, and you know, that's the other thing, and for whatever reason, you know, Mel Tucker was a snake oil salesman, but for whatever reason, he, you know, because he could win a press conference from, you know, by, like, you know, pounding his fist once in a while, you know, people want to see that. I think people have just decided that, you know, Smith is a lot of people have decided, a lot of people that text me nonstop and text me and tell me what donors think all the time. A lot of those people have decided that Smith's not regional enough. You know, they're gonna paint him with the same brush that John L. Smith got painted with. You know, like, it's different. You know, they think, you know, they equate California with being laid back and chill. John L. Smith was, like, you know, had the hillbilly vibe coming in, and but I think, you know, like, there's a lot less patience. Period.
Less patience.
But the other thing is, like, we talk about the money. Whatever's going to happen is going to cost a ton of money. You know, I think the better question is, like, for Michigan State, okay, so let's assume you move in a different direction. Do you have your NIL thing situated, taken care of, or are you just banking that the House settlement is going to be, you know, is going to take care of all that stuff? I don't care who you put in this program, if you don't have the resources to compete in the Big Ten, you don't have the resources to compete in the Big Ten. It's not gonna do a whole lot. But if you go in a different direction, you're losing 70 players. I don't care who you are. You're losing 70 players. So it's almost, to me, Michigan State fans, I think they're spoiled for success under D'Antonio. They never, you know, like, when Lloyd Carr left Michigan, I think a lot of Michigan fans were in the same type of scenario. They're like, oh, all we got to do is this. We're going to bring in a little bit more passing with Rich Rodriguez, and all of a sudden what Lloyd Carr did wasn't going to be. It's going to be better than that. And I think Michigan State fans are spoiled under Mark D'Antonio. There's a consistent level of success. There's a consistent way that it looked. You might beat us, but we're going to physically dominate you, and you're going to lose the next week because you're going to be sore. That's no longer the case at Michigan State. So a lot of this stuff, like the defense, the being tough, the being able to physically win a fight in a phone booth, being competitive against heavy or opponents in your own weight class, those are all taken for granted, and they're not there. So if you move in a different direction, though, it's going to cost a ton of money. I think a lot of people assume, too, because there's a new AD, that he's automatically going to move in that direction. And who knows, but what's going to happen. But it almost reminds me, if you're going to do this and you're going to be in that cycle that Michigan State would potentially get in if you move in a different direction with a coach, it's going to be like a baseball team rebuild, where you're going to have to rebuild the whole farm system and all that stuff. And fans, if you want to move in a different direction, I'm not arguing whether it's the right thing or the wrong thing to do, but it's going to start from a lower rung than it was when Jonathan Smith came in, and he did not inherit an ideal situation. But is it going to get better moving forward? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I would feel a whole lot better about that if Michigan State won games like this and went to a bowl game. I don't care. Fans will be like 6-6. That sucks. Well, to me, that's a step in the right direction against that schedule that Michigan State has. But now to do that, you have to win 3 games against a conference schedule remaining that it's going to be really hard to win 3 games.
He's a proven coach that did really good things at Oregon State, and if you move in a new direction, the coaches that are available to you might not have the resume that he had. There's a good chance that he had a hot resume at the time, did some really good work at a program where it's not easy to win. The only reason Michigan State was able to get him is because the Pac-12 disintegrated. Otherwise, he wouldn't have left that job to come here. So Michigan State was lucky, I thought, that year, timing-wise, to have a candidate with his resume to come in. Now, as it's turned out, is all the elbow grease, pumping in the right direction positively, like Michigan State fans are like I thought it could and would? No, the defense is not as good as I thought it would be. And Smith pretty much delegates that to Joe Rossi. And Joe Rossi's got to be real disappointed with how the defense did today, among other things, all season. So for whatever reason, the way he was able to build it at Oregon State not working.
It took
here.
a long time for him to build it at Oregon State, by the way.
And he had lesser expectations and more time and less pressure. They went 2-10, then 5-7. Then I think in year 3 was the year where they really broke through and had a top 20 team and beat Florida in a bowl game. And then, no, that would have been year 4 when that happened. Year 3 was bowl game. Year 4 was a big breakthrough. And I think year 5 was his final year when Michigan State went and got him. But Oregon State, he had time, not all this pressure, 4 games, 6 games into year number 2, where people were, wanting to cut bait. But back then, I didn't watch every Oregon State game. Back then, I haven't watched any of the first 2 years. But I suspect that the fans saw progress. And when you go 5-7 in year 2, they can identify progress. Now, the Pac-12 back then was not as strong as the Big Ten is now. And they had a different type of knuckleball approach where they were kind of an under-center physical approach, which was different in the Pac-12. It's not different in the Big Ten. So the knuckleball is not the same here because people see that more often. So there's a lot of things that don't translate directly. Secondly, he got a new defensive coordinator, didn't bring his coordinator with him, hired Rossi, a Big Ten defensive coordinator, which I thought was a great hire at the time. It's not showing any traction yet, and you can sense that, among other things, Smith is very upset with himself and then the entire staff. That includes the defensive staff, includes everybody. I wonder if he's going to make any changes. I wonder what he's talking about in terms of getting this ship righted. He said, we have to correct what we can correct and XYZ. That part right there. We have to correct what we can correct. Well, what can you not correct? What you cannot correct is some of those one-on-ones that you're going to lose against better athletes because the roster is what it is at this point, but it still should be better than losing like this to UCLA.
Yeah, it's a really tough situation when I look at it. The one thing I would say, the difference between Oregon State that he inherited is, A, he's a favored son. He was like the all-time passing leader when he left Oregon State. So, and he brought them to heights that they hadn't been brought to. B, the expectations at Oregon State were lower because they'd been a doormat for so long. Michigan State, there's a lot of people that remember competing for championships. A lot of people remember beating Michigan, and that type of thing. So those are a little bit different. I think you can also, like, if you're like in the anti Jonathan Smith corner, you could say, well, Dennis Erickson didn't do very well at Wisconsin. That's and then the other guy that came in from I can't remember the other guy that Wisconsin had, but Then again, if you start switching coaches, like
Luke Fickle at Wisconsin.
Luke Fickle, but before that, they had a couple West Coast guys. That came,
Anderson.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Dennis. I'm sorry,
whatever his name was.
Gary Anderson.
Gary, yes.
Anderson. He was an established coach, and there's other examples of that.
Anderson left Wisconsin like on his own. He didn't really fail there. He just
but he wasn't doing well, and I wonder if that was like a writing on the wall type of thing. But so I don't know if there's a right or a wrong thing. Like if I was like, let's say the coaching market, you and I were in the car on the way back from Nebraska for a long time, so we talked about a lot of topics. Sometimes the same topic 50 times. Like one of the things you talked about, and I think if you're going to make a coaching hire, like one of the criteria in the last coaching search for Michigan State was they wanted an established head coach. Good luck with that. There aren't any out there.
Good luck. It's going to be a thin pool.
Because of this expanded playoff field. There's going to be a lot of schools that are thinking all we got to do is change our head coach to get into that playoff mix. So, what are you going to do? Are you going to go outside the box? Like a Signetti hire at Indiana, that was outside the box. A lot of people thought that was crazy, but
that turned out to be a strength for Indiana, that they were able to just like all of a sudden throw a Hail Mary and hire a 64-year-old guy. Let's give it a try. We got nothing to lose. We've been bad for 100 years, and it worked.
Right. And then
Michigan State couldn't really take that chance.
But there's no Bill O'Brien out there.
I really liked Bill O'Brien 4 weeks ago, Paul.
But not now. Pat Narduzzi, he was going to get fired, and I don't know what he did today, but
he beat Florida State.
Right. So I mean, there's
4-2.
So there's a lot of those type of things. I don't know what really the answer is, but I kind of wonder. There's going to be those established head coaches are like, what's wrong with Michigan State? They're not going to look at Jonathan Smith. They're going to look at, okay, what's wrong with Michigan State? You've got Joe Rossi, one of the most respected coordinators in the Big Ten. Broyles Award finalist a couple of times. He had success at Minnesota, a team that hasn't really had a lot of defensive success. If you go back and you look at, go all the way back to Glenn Mason. What was the problem with Glenn Mason's teams? Well, they could score with the best of them, but they couldn't stop anything because they didn't have enough talent. And Joe Rossi did a really good job at Minnesota. Minnesota still, I think, recruits with their hand behind their back. So if Michigan State's not winning with established coaches with proving track records, there's going to be people out there that are going to say, what's wrong with Michigan State? And I wonder about that too as well. And if you don't have all the resources you need, is that part of it? You can say, this guy should do this guy should do that. But if he doesn't have the resources that he needs to win, hiring a new AD or hiring a new this or that isn't going to help until you give that guy the resources. And if there's a coaching change, there's going to have to be a crap ton of resources because it's going to be, if you want to rebuild, you're going to go through a Bill Belichick type of year. You're going to have to bring in 70 new guys or whatever. I just don't know what the answer is. Are Michigan State fans going to be happy like Purdue fans are that, hey, at least we're putting up a couple, we're scoring a couple touchdowns, we're losing by 20 points, at least it's not 40.
Michigan State fans have always been real patient, but it's the landscape of college football, even Michigan State fans are like, no, time to move on a year and a half.
Yeah, I think that's I think it's the nature of the beast. I mean, I think we've talked about that when we were in the car about how, there are very few fan bases that are happy with what their team is doing. You used to like Penn State. Penn State, like this past week, man. James Franklin. I'm not the biggest fan of James Franklin. I think that, but he's had some good years there, and like a lot of people saying I hear people saying James Franklin's on the hot seat. It's just what it is in that landscape. It's different.
So,
but I don't know. Is it? I mean,
is what?
Should Michigan State be looking at that kind of stuff?
They're hearing from the athletic administration's hearing from donors. Donors are upset. It's like, okay, well, how much money is it going to take? And donors like,
Are donors? Here's my question. I hear all the time about donors being upset.
Yeah.
Which one of those? I mean, and I don't have money, so I'm not putting it in the kitty. But all these people that are so upset, these donors are upset. Are you upset because you're spending a ton of money out there and getting your players and getting 4 and 5 star players out here? Is that why they're upset? They're upset, but where's the money that's coming in this program that allows them to compete on the level of some of the other ones?
And at what level does that upset nature, does that have any impact on making a decision? If you're the athletic administration, do you I mean, what's the cost of not making a decision, which could be a rash decision, unless you're seeing progress? That's the problem. If you're losing but you're seeing progress, that's different.
Yeah.
What happened today? I was making the Izzo comparison. I mentioned this on SpartanMag Live this week also. December of 1997, when they went first year NIT, second year they had Cleaves, he was injured, NIT again. Third year in December they lost to U of D, and this is Jonathan Smith's U of D.
Except
it's in year two. They had Rashad Phillips. They were good, but still, it was over for Izzo at that point.
The difference
it's not over yet here, but this is similar. And Izzo rallied, beat Purdue, preseason Big Ten favorite that year, and ended up winning the Big Ten out of nowhere. That's not going to happen here, but they need to have a type of rebound that Izzo got in year three.
I don't think you can compare basketball and football because there's so many more games. There's not opportunities to rebound. They're not playing UCLA again. You know what I'm saying? Like this was the one game that they had, like, the must win, and then they'd have to find a way to win it at Iowa.
But I sense that this is the game that caused the majority of Michigan State fans to give up and say it's not happening.
Yeah.
Just like Izzo had the majority of Michigan State basketball fans give up after that U of D game in December of 97.
Did, in some ways, like, I remember covering the John L. Smith's last game at Indiana.
Yes, and then what is the cost if you keep a coach that fans have given up on? He's got to win them back, and it's the only way you can do that is to play better football.
Then you run the risk of running into it. You run the risk of running into the Deshaun Foster situation because none of the UCLA fans believed in him after year one. They decided that because he's a big name in their program, they kept him. Or Chip Kelly, he kind of wore out his welcome, and then he beat USC, and then he got retained, and then he got fired mid-season.
He wanted this job, by the way.
Right.
Little tidbit there for you.
Right. So, but he wouldn't have been a good fit here either. I don't think so.
Now, you mentioned the Indiana game, John L. Smith era.
I just felt like that was one of those games where, going into that game.
His final year?
Yeah, going into that game. And I remember covering it, and there's a reason why it reminded me of that is there's a running back from Detroit that Michigan State didn't recruit. And I can't remember the guy's name, but he has 3 touchdowns in that game. He had the best game of his life. And the run defense in this game, reminded me of the run defense in that game, and it just kind of fell apart. And it was just like, so I don't want to say this is the end for Jonathan Smith, but when you see stuff like that, it's like it's a barometer, a litmus test. And I'm not saying anyone gave up out there. I don't think Michigan State players gave up, but they did not play to the standard that they need to play for people to have pride in their program.
Looked like a broken team, didn't it?
Yeah, it did.
And that game in Indiana you're talking about was year 4 of the John L. Smith era. It looked like a broken team, and he was fired the next Monday or Tuesday.
Yeah.
Now, that was year 4, and that was the point in which you realized that they weren't going to go to a bowl game for a 3rd straight year. And historically, that's kind of been the barometer. Muddy Waters, 3 and out, 3 seasons with no bowl games. Bobby Williams, no bowl game in year 1. Silicon Valley Classic in year 2 and 01. And then 02 in year 3, no bowl game. And they had all kinds of underlying problems, with recreational problems on that team and so forth. And everybody knew it around town. There's nothing like that around with this team. But defensively, to use poor grammar, the boat don't float.
Yeah, so the one thing I wanted to, we've been going on for a long time, but one thing I want to talk about, and I did think that, going back to Smith's press conference, I thought one of the more intriguing things that was brought up was he was asked about, some of the basic stuff, on defense. And I don't understand, I'm kind of like him, I don't understand, how a simple, check down pass to a running back, that would go for a maximum of 10 yards, for most teams is routinely an alarming number of times is getting out for 20 or more yards.
Saw busted coverages today. Didn't see it against
Right.
Nebraska. Saw busted coverages come back today.
So I didn't expect that from a Joe Rossi defense. And so the question is, and this has been kind of whispered around the building a little bit, and there's been some hints here or there from different defensive coaches, is the defense too complicated? Are guys overly burdened? And I think that's another thing that they have to look at. Can you simplify the defense? I think of some of the defenses in the Big Ten, guys that have had great reputations as defensive coaches, but it didn't work out very well. Ron Turner at Illinois, he overly complicated that defense at times. That's one of the things that I think Smith is wondering right now. Are things too complicated? Why aren't we able to do simple things on defense that we take for granted.
He's searching for answers. He mentioned that. And I give Smith credit for being pretty much transparent on a lot of things, saying, do we have too much in on defense? Are we working them too hard during the week? And should we be saving their legs for Saturday? He's going through a lot of checklists as a coach as to why it looks like this. And he seems as surprised as the fans are that they're coming out here and regressing.
It's funny because Nebraska, they went harder in practice than they normally would during their bye week, right? And they had some success against Michigan State. They won the game at least. I think Michigan State helped them in that regard. But, you look at Joe Rossi's talking about they had a great week at practice. He mentioned earlier this week that they've had 3 straight great weeks of practice. So, I can understand where Smith is saying, okay, maybe we are we going too hard? I wonder if guys are getting hurt in practice, if that's part of it too. But I don't understand why guys are missing tackles or tackling high or, not making tackles out there that they did
and they are
in week 1, week 2, and week 3.
And they are losing players in practice every week.
Right.
Like the Jalen Thompson thing happened in practice. Jaden Savory, the tight end, that happened in practice. Prior to that, the Ade Willie thing the week before, that happened in practice. So they're working at it. They're hard. They've asked these players to step to the plate and give their all in practice. It sounds like they are. But is there a point of diminishing returns on that?
But if you don't practice it, then you're not going to see it out there, and then guys are going to get hurt in games. Like Pat Fitzgerald went through that a lot at Northwestern. You try so we see it in basketball too. If you don't practice it, you're not going to rebound. You know what I'm saying? So you have to do a certain amount, and sometimes doing the opposite of what you're doing isn't necessarily going to win. Isn't going to necessarily get the desired result either.
Yeah. I'm conflicted on everything because I've never been one that has been a knee-jerk and reacting to coaches so early. I've always been a 3 or 4 or 5 year plan guy, going back to the old days. And to think of myself thinking that 1.5 seasons that Michigan State should be in, we've seen enough, we need to move on. That's just 16, 18 games, whatever it is. I'm not happy with myself as that person. That's just like everybody else, but but having success and making progress when the landscape is turning against you is really hard to do. And like I said, sometimes the university community and the whole universe makes the decision for you, and I don't think they're there yet. But I'm a little disappointed in myself that I'm even acknowledging that after a season and a half that that going in another direction might be the right thing. I'm not saying that is. I'm mad at myself for even acknowledging that is a possibility.
I'm not advocating for it. I'm just saying, I guess what it comes down to is people are talking about it, right?
Everybody is. Everybody is lost hope.
Right.
That I've heard from. Now that can change real quickly. I made a point.
I don't think so.
It might not, and I don't see much. A chance that a whole lot's going to change in the next 2 weeks against Indiana and Michigan. I made the point in the SpartanMag Live last week. Also, I can't remember what I was going to say.
I don't think this. The way they run the program, and I'm not saying this is wrong. If you got a player development model and you want to progressively get better and you want to incrementally get better each season, that's not happening right now. But there's not a scenario where they're going to just all of a sudden go. With the team that they have, they're not going to go out and beat an Indiana or go out and beat a Michigan, fans will be like, hey, it's happened before. There's been upsets. And yeah, there have been upsets, but it would be super fluky for that to happen.
Not with the holes that they're showing.
So that's the problem is like if you can show that you're building and putting blocks on top of it, and that, hey, it might not be this year, but if we can go beat Iowa in Iowa City, you can beat Nebraska at Nebraska. That's a sign of progress in the right direction. To me, the frustration with this is, in some ways, the offense has shown that it's better at times. At least there's some personnel that might be better. Like there's better skilled personnel than they had last year, I think. But there's times that they've scored a little bit, but they're not doing what they need to do to win games that fans think they should in this year. And it's hyper competitive in college football. Obviously, the Big Ten has got a ton of resources. Obviously, so. Between the portal and NIL, everyone assumes everyone else sees success stories, right? So everything is accelerated, and the success that D'Antonio had, that's kind of, he created a little bit of a beast, and got rid of Mel Tucker. You bring in Jonathan Smith. People are going to start talking about how much Smith's salary is. It's a high salary. It's a competitive conference. I understand why fans are upset. I'm not advocating for a change, but it just feels like it's snowballing in that direction. And
something stark needs to
we've
change.
seen that. I mean, there's people there's insurgents out there that have been waiting for this. And there's a lot, but if you're gonna do it, you got to have a plan, and you're gonna have a lot of money.
Yeah.
Otherwise, any change for change's sake doesn't do you a whole lot of good unless there's a plan and there's a whole crap ton of money, and I don't know where that's coming from.
I'm not sure there is. We hear about there's big money donors that are really upset. Well, really, is it worth, and even if you do have that money, do you, like you said, do people say, what's wrong with Michigan State that they're only giving Jonathan Smith a year and a half? Who do they think they are? When you get outside of this bubble, that's what they would say. I know what I was going to say about a minute ago on the SpartanMag Live. Somebody asked a question in the mailbag. What about all the people that are upset with Jonathan Smith that want to move on? And a lot of these people want it. This is before this weekend, and my answer was, what people? Is it people on the message board? So they're not the people that make a decision on this. That was my stance 5 days ago. But now that it's like those percentages have exponentially amplified after today. Then when you have that number of your base and your constituents that are unhappy, it does get heard at the administrative levels to the point where people talk money and so forth. I don't know how far that's going to go. Jonathan Smith, I'm sure, is aware of it, and he's not hiding from that. And they need, and he seems very urgent to get some answers and make some corrections quickly. But I just wonder what's going on in his head as to whether this is more difficult than he thought it would be. The roster's not as good as he thought it was going to be. The opponents are better than he thought, and whether he believes that this can be turned around or not. Now, he's a competitor. He's a coach. Coaches always believe they can get something going. But this has really hit. It's a crisis situation now. Now, the Indiana game you're talking about was year 4, and that team did look like it was becoming broken. This is still early. We've seen some football teams turn some things around sometimes, but it's very hard to do. UCLA's turned their fortunes around. They might win some games going forward. It's hard to get it going from here. I'll say one other thing. Usually in year 2, if a coach has a backward year in year 2, rarely do they rally and do things positively later. Nebulous is a guy that posts on our message board. He made that point a couple days ago, and that's a good point. I will say occasionally there's an exception to that, not very often, but when it happens in other programs, it's usually at a downtrodden program that isn't expecting a whole lot, so they've got nothing more to do than just stick with the guy. That happened at Purdue with Jeff Brom. He had a year and then a stepward back and a backward step in year 2, and then decent, and then another step back, and then he kind of hit it later when he had his real big year and beat Tennessee in the bowl game. But Purdue is like, well, what are we going to do? We can't fire him. We'll have Danny Hope all over again, or whatever his name was, and the succession of coaches they had. Indiana, they hire Signetti because why not? We've been bad for 100 years. Now they're the best they've ever been. Some of those programs that have less to lose, some mid-majors. A lot of the mid-major candidates that you see right now that are having a good year, they're 5-1, so they become a hot candidate because of one good year. You go back and look at their early seasons, those mid-major programs stick with those guys because they've got nothing else better they can do. But Michigan State, after a year and a half, who do we as a community think we are that to just pull plug on a proven coach? Why do we think that? Because the progress isn't there, so it's got to turn around.
Yeah, it's me. I wonder how big of the deal of resources. Part of me wishes that Jonathan Smith, I wish he would last year would have stepped up and said, publicly, I need this, I need this, I need this. I'm not, that we need that type of commitment. And I know he's not that type of guy. He's not going to come out and say, hey, listen, I can't win at the level that you guys want to win at unless I have this. But I do think that, for Michigan State to get back to winning at that level that people got spoiled at under D'Antonio, Michigan State they need real commitment. They need real financial, like resources. And I don't care who you hire. If that commitment's not there and those resources aren't there, I think there's only so high a ceiling you're going to get.
And in this day and age, also with the short patience, a coach like Smith, who's an offensive coordinator for Peterson at Washington, and a college football playoff team, offensive coach, former quarterback, basically delegates the defense to someone else, which, I mean, that's okay. Steve Spurrier did that. A lot of coaches have done that over the years. You get a year and a half, and if he feels like the defensive direction he went in is not going well, it's too bad. You're out. You only get one out. You know, the quarterback he brought with him, Childs, he hits his ceiling, doesn't work out. It's too bad. You had your chance. You had your one quarterback and your one defensive coordinator or staff or whatever. You don't get a second one. You know, maybe you should. Like I remember when it turned out Rich Rodriguez, he was kind of a one-hit wonder when he was a practitioner of the zone read option when he was at Tulane and then at West Virginia. No one knew how to stop that offense for a while, got the job at Michigan. And I'm not saying he ever would have been any good at Michigan, but he never had a running quarterback at Michigan. They got rid of him in year 3 before he was able to bring in his own Pat White to do his offense the way he knew how to do it. Now, people caught up to that offense and it wouldn't have worked anyway. But he had one quarterback. He had Stephen Threet to begin with. And then
Denard Robinson.
Yeah, Denard Robinson. Well, I guess they'd have a running quarterback.
He didn't
there.
throw the ball like Pat White, but he was electric.
That's
I believe
true.
he had Denard Robinson.
I can't remember. They probably did. Yeah, shoelace guy. Yeah. So
it was never Pat White because Pat White could throw the ball, and that was what they did. Denard Robinson, he threw moonballs.
Yeah. So to pull the plug but that's college football today. If you're a coach, I guess you only get 1 or 2 strikes in a couple of those areas.
The reason I say the resource thing, I'm thinking about Lincoln Riley at USC. You know, like I don't doubt that Lincoln Riley's a good coach. You know, I think he is, and I think he's proven that. But the same thing, like USC writers and stuff like that. You know, like I did a Q&A exchange with one of those guys, and you know, they're like, "Yeah, we know how good Jonathan Smith is and his staff are." You know, those type of things. But Lincoln Riley, you know, I think they didn't have quite the resources that USC would have liked to have when he took over that program as well. It's a weird type of deal when you hire an established coach because a lot of the USC fans are like, "Oh, it's Lincoln Riley. He's really good. He was great in the past. It's gonna go bump up." I think Michigan State fans had much higher expectations because of the success that Smith had with the resources he had at Oregon State, and it has been disappointing, frankly.
Meanwhile, I get criticized, and you probably do too a little bit, because we're not critical enough. So
yeah.
we're getting criticized because we're not critical enough. So we're not nearly the pressure that the coaches are under, but
we try not to be reactionaries. You know, like some of it is like you and I are both honest with people. Like I don't think Michigan State met expectations today from a competitive aspect. I think that's a problem, but I'm not gonna throw someone under the bus unnecessarily.
Well,
there's a lot of like nuance to all this type of stuff. I don't think I didn't think when Alan Haller was fired that was necessarily everything's going to be okay. You know, we got a new athletic director with a great reputation. Everything's going to be okay. You know, it's a process, and so I kind of struggle with that. You know, like when you're raising kids or whatever, you try to tell them to finish what you start and that type of thing. Close your circles. And then, so I don't want to be out here saying, "Oh, it's year 2 and the guy should be fired," because
I'm usually never that
guy.
guy.
It doesn't sit right with me. But I also believe that if everybody in your base and everybody in the community gives up on you, that sometimes there's an avalanche is so heavy that you can't dig yourself out. And when that happens, then I think it's inevitable, whether it's right or wrong. I would say if he was gone after 2 years, it would be wrong. Just because
at face value.
Probably because he did deserve some more time. At the same time, if your people abandon you, then and there's no way out, then it is what it is.
Yeah, if you start facing those headwinds, it becomes real difficult, and they need to do more to change those headwinds, and that's going to be really hard to do. I mean, from the outside looking in, we look at other programs, and Arkansas fires Brett Bielema, and I'm like, who does Arkansas think they are? And Bielema's still asking that. Well, I guess 8-4 wasn't good enough for them, and he had one step backward in year 4, and he's gone. You don't want to judge yourself through the prism of others, but will they wonder? Who does Michigan State think they are firing Jonathan Smith in 2 years? Theoretically, if that happens. Now, so Michigan State's in a tough situation. The football team's not good. The fans have lost faith. They still have work to do second half of the season to get some things turned around. But usually it's really, really hard to turn things around. You are what you are on an offensive line usually at this point in the season, and they can't get the run game going, which surprises me because Mahalchik eventually had a really good win at Oregon State based on recruiting, evaluation, player development. They've had 18 games so far, and a lot of people no longer believe. And that's one of many things that they're operating against right now as they head into the second half of the season.
I guess the other problem I would say is like when we're looking forward to covering basketball because that's what our readers want to read about right now. I mean, that to me is takes the temperature of the fan base right there. Like it's midway through the football season and people want to focus on basketball. A basketball season where Michigan State's is favored to finish 5th or 6th in the conference. It's like, okay, if your fan base is ready to turn the page to basketball, and this has always been a football-first school with basketball success, that's a problem. And if they continue, let's say they go to Indiana, they lose 70-3, or that's going to be, I talk about the Avalanche, that's going to be even worse. And there's also residual stuff coming off of Indiana because Indiana is can be physical and whatnot, and then like if you lose to Michigan in an avalanche type fashion, then all bets are off. So it's different because it's hard to see the end in sight. Once that thing starts spiraling, and the body language of the players on the sideline, that was one thing, and then the other thing is the body language of the two captains in the post game today. That was really, really dejected, and I understand that they're upset, and it's it's an aftermath of a loss and whatnot, but that was about as defeated as I've seen two players look at a podium in a long, long time. And, I just wonder, you always kind of wonder if they have what it takes to get off the mat. And they're going to, even if they get off the mat, it's going to be tough next weekend.
Among other things, other dynamics in today's college football at Michigan State, those are good people and those are captains and so forth. And, they've worked real hard to get camaraderie and get players to know each other in a short period of time. But the truth of the matter is these players on this team have not known each other very long. Yeah. You got 40 new players this year, 40 new players last year. It's not like you've got 3 different recruiting classes that have been around for 5 years that are really tight, have tight bonds. They have bonds to an extent that you can have bonds in a short period of time. And I know there's other teams around the country that have talent and they win and they have good camaraderie. But at a time like this, when you are on the mat, and those two guys are good gentlemen and good leaders and so forth, but in the transient nature of college football today with the transfer portal, these players, a lot of them don't know each other very well.
It's not the same, too. There's like the culture of high school athletics coming out. It's different. There's more entitlement. There's more. It's not the. It's not like we sweat together and stuff like that. There's you want to do something as a team, you want to have success, but I don't think there's that resilience through hard work because talking to a couple basketball coaches last week, and they're talking about how kids rarely, even high-level athletes rarely deal the way you'd like them to when faced with real adversity. And this is real adversity, and it's easy to be a leader. It's easy to lead when you're winning some games or you're close or you can have progress, but it's really, really tough for those captains. And there's 5 of them. There's a lot of captains, but it's going to be tough for those guys to have really effective leadership coming off this game.
I thought the fans showed up pretty good today. It was a noon kickoff, which was fun and nice and new, and autumn and leaves and everything. They've not had a home game in 4 weeks, so there was some pent-up demand for that. Tailgating was really good, so it was a late arriving crowd because the tailgates were pretty good. By the second quarter, it was maybe 90% full of the stadium, 85%.
More than that.
90? All right, and it was pretty good. So they showed up, and they were positive. They wanted to see something good, and there were some boos like we talked about earlier. So the fans have done their part today and through for decades and decades, and you just they want to believe, and they're looking for reasons to think that things are heading in the right direction. You had to win this game, and you don't lose the game, or you don't win the game. Not only do you lose, but you lose like that with holes everywhere. Alarming situation, and it's hit crisis mode, something I didn't expect 3 days ago or 10 days ago, but it's here, and it's at Michigan State right now.
The last thing I would say is there's zero silver lining in this game. There might be one person out there that thinks, well, maybe there'll be a quarterback change, but there was nothing that...
There's at least a pretty good second-string quarterback at some point.
But that's not what I would consider a silver lining. There's nothing you can, as a team...
You didn't want to have to find that out today.
It's there's probably other situations. If I went back and watched everything, there's probably one guy that had a decent game. Okay, I don't know whom that might be.
And there were changes today. They did not start Bell and Eaton at corner. And I thought Bell had been having a pretty good season, and Rossi complimented him for what he did in the slot last week against Nebraska. Rucker was out there early. Aiden West started, but then 14-7, Eaton and Bell came in a little bit later. So they were changing some things up, which was interesting.
Yeah, but I think Eaton and Bell are probably your best run stoppers too.
That's a good point.
Right. So that's like the one thing. It's like, okay, we're talking about guys not stopping the run, and I'm thinking to myself, why is a running back cutting to the outside and there's no one there to stop him? Well, if you don't have your physical corners out there, there's a reason why Joe Rossi likes big physical corners. So I wonder if is that a deal where you're cutting off your nose to spite your face? I don't know. I'd have to go back and watch it, but it wasn't good enough today.
Also, for the second straight week, Michigan's two best pass plays, longest pass plays, were both from Alessio Milivojevic. And, he played half the game, so I guess it's not a big surprise. He's going against a UCLA defense with some more reserves in there that's dialed back a little bit more. But let the record show that downfield passing, he's made better connections than Childs the last two games. So that'll continue to get evaluated. And Michigan State's got, I don't want to use cliches, but the old soul searching and all those things. Doesn't matter, man. They're on the clock. Next man up against Indiana. It's just gonna get tougher from here. And Michigan State, really, really dismal situation as they try to figure out what's next. And there's a lot of unknowns for the near future and the distant future.
I mean, the only thing they can hope for is Indiana loses to Oregon big, or not big, but there's a hangover or something like that. It's not good. It's not going to look good.
I don't think so. We talked about that a couple days ago, that if Indiana did have either a big win or a big loss,
but
coming back after the travel, you might catch them napping a little bit.
Scenario includes,
but even if you catch them napping, that's not going to be.
That scenario includes Michigan State feeling good about itself,
playing,
right?
solid,
that scenario doesn't work if Michigan State plays like crap and doesn't get things figured out, because you got to really figure things out moving forward. That scenario only works if Michigan State has got something to build on. They do not. And
so Smith was really urgent and exacerbated after the game. I'll be eager to see if there's any changes that he institutes. I don't know if there will be. But he knows that it's his neck on the chopping block and his reputation. And he is urgent to get this thing changed. And it's the biggest challenge of his coaching career, no question about it, starting right now. Anything else, Paul? For Paul Konyndyk, my name is Jim Comparoni with the Spartans from Spartan Stadium for SpartanMag.com.